of scheduling your own system to your set positions, how we use our levels of imagination settings. We can't get into proficiency, efficacy, and performance until we get out of thoughts of thinking. There's no thoughts of thinking or anything of action of emotion because it affects you already existing. The plot division location puts you in 144 platform. Now you have to understand how to formulate your equations and know how to do it individual lines positions. That puts you in position location your settings all through travel. Okay. Integrating set lines of calculation screen locations. So let's get into wave line centers, waving screens, voicing patterns, and track communication. Sets position to its tone centers and rotation to its cycle. Okay, there's a graph screen, voice line pattern. So it has an A value, it has a B setting, it has a C tractions, and a D location. Complicated, right? But if you don't understand yourself, so we're just going to start with graphs today. Everything is a graph. Everything has to be a graph. It centralizes calculations. So if we understand the alpha line channel, that process lines in alpha beta, that sets course centers over lines of theta, sets communication setting back in beta, sets course centers into omega, and set lines of screen locations back to 0, 1. So we have to understand how a computer goes from 0 through pi, okay? From 0 to 0, 5. From 0, 5 to 0, 3. 0, 3 to 0, 4. 0, 4 to 0, 2, back to 0. Okay? So all you're doing is creating an energetic dome. That's all you're creating. And when you create that dome, at a position, you're creating yourself inside tractions. That's protecting your system with force fields and lines your E fields and travel communications. Sets position lines of torical fields, take D over tractions, A over C over positions, process lines of B over set lines, communicates in high centers, ground, calculate, modify. There's your teleportation vessel and travel. Okay? So there's a reason why you have to understand everything is created through a graph screen. So if we get to understand how to work with that, then we understand how to do it through our alphabetical system. Let's go through A, B interactions over lines of C. Process. Now what you guys have to understand, when you're processing things, the connections to its A has to travel through its B, has to travel through its C in chronological order. That puts position lines at set location with settings, process lines positions all levels of U, and line course centers of 13 center inline rotations into networks of design line communication with calculation. Then we cross the settings, line connection setting, and position. Okay. Changing course, direct lines of delta heading, process lines that indicates setting and flux over set travel. Process indicates lines over lines of pi over C over travel, and set position lines of calculation, set input graph screen adaptations of travel communications. So, guys, going through the brain is very complicated if you don't understand your A, B, and C. Okay? And that puts you in your watts, your gigawatts, your megawatts, your computer watts, your central system, your main drive, your high drive, and set lines of flux. Sets communication setting and travels into your electrical light bulb and set position. Travel point lines of graph and your battery resistors and transistors over line screens and position locations and set travel. Two batteries of resetters rotates the system to calculate and modify through X, process lines of position lines of travel, direct lines of plus over negative and screen locations. Positive and negative. Indicates graph lines, electrical line course, bar direction of timelines, set lines of circuits, location, system locations to its motherboard and travel. That's right, it's motherboard. So your body conception is lines of B over lines of A, that process lines of indications over C over D, that process lines of direct line communication setting over lines of flux over screen adaptation and travel. Sets lines, course centers, and communication high centers, platforms over lines, crossing line, position, solar generation, screen location, instant location setting, and traction. Directing ground centers of flux, gravity lock line, screen location setting, compressors, location setting calculations. So position lines over lines of B is the balance of flux over yin and yang that communicates the system all through settings and calculations. Flux capacitor. Indicates lines of A, process lines over lines of C, and position of pi, process lines of direct lines of D over lines of A, E equals lines of A over B over C. Since travels endpoint communication graphs, I've configured the system all through time locks and screens at time reactor. High signal location settings sets lines of course centers and ground lines of sequence and part acceleration system all through change in travel. Puts position lines of balance and set position lines of calculations. Okay, all through setting, all through operation. So everything that we do is a constant continuous flow that we constantly get in position of is understand how to go through truth and false narratives. So setting position line height centers, graphing screens, 4 centers of signals. Okay, now understand how to create a graph, guys. When you're creating graphs, you're traveling through the graphs automatically. So you're in this position of center. Okay, that's you. This is you. Staying in within the line center. Okay, you're not overriding your system. You're staying within the line, right? So you stay within the line, you stay within the line, you stay with another line, you stay with that line, you stay with that box frame that communicates to its computer frame. That puts position lines and settings all through set position of light, shades, and shadows to its void. And you're creating, now you can go outside set location. So as you go, you basically put a box frame outside line directions and 1/3 graph communication. Now that position opens up all signals to its void itself that rotates the system all through track location system and calculations. Now it's very powerful because it's inside setting. And then we set up the light, and then we set up the shades and shadows and travel. Okay, so it's really interesting how you come into that. And then you just shade it in, because we're just light, shades, and shadows, guys. We're not in line signal locations. There's no imaginary line that we're connected to. We have to understand how to use our frequencies at different levels and settings. Understand that through adaptations of force of recognition. There it is, boom. Okay, now having a confirmation system, then you go through settings, line, calculate, modify, go through another window, add the equation, set lines in sequence, add the graph communication screen lines in box frame and travel. That puts position of graph set positions together and track communications. Now you have an open window frame. You can inside lines, inside travel communications, go through this direction, location, setting, and travel. Set calculations, height centers come into window frame and set position with measure and scale at off position, location, and travel. Directing ground centers, then you can go down slope in rotation system. So all you're doing is you're connecting your line screens. Not exactly how you're staying within your own lanes. That's what I want you guys to understand. Okay, stay within the line mark or stay with the outline mark. So remember, when you color in, you stay within the line. You don't go outline. You don't light, shades, and shadows of anything. You just stay in directions of the line. Each line connects each line. All right, so once we get in that positions, then we get into the high centers. That puts everything at platforms. Now we go in that line screen. We go from one corner setting, process right through travel in that positions. Okay, one direct line to one direct line to set travel. Sets communication high centers, and we go through 2/3 graphs into road screens, a 3 center operation. There's the road. Okay, inside the set position. Now, when you get in that position, you have to create a location grid so the avatar can travel through its tunnel of its bridging system and the calculations. As it's going through its bridging system, it creates its sending lines of settings. It needs its satellites. It needs its towers of communication, all three directions. Okay? So I'm just trying to get you guys to understand how to work within the triangulation of a box or box training locations of graph screens and know exactly how to go through light, shades, and shadows and set positions. So in that line screen adaptation setting, you have your sun on this position locations and travel. Okay? Now it indicates lines over the moon, offline centers and rotation surface of travel, and direct lines of calculation setting. Cross lines of polarities, cross in that indication system all through projections, directing ground centers, 3 centers of measure, 4 centers of scale, 5 centers of sector, vector, and 1 quad sequence of communication. Now, once we understand how to use that, we can use a generation line screens, operation line center to our solar system locations. Says communications and ground lines of sequence. So there's a lot of things you can do in measure and scale as you come into line signals. Okay, so it's important you stay within your own lanes more than ever because your E factors are coming into the out of sync, out of mind into 144. So let's go through another graph and we'll go through line conditions, 3 alpha channels, alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3, alpha center, and B. Okay, so it's offline setting. See, that's outside, that's not inside. So the line signal has to go back in tractions and back in locations and 2 centers of flux over screen location. Now, in that direction settings, you change formation lines of ground, so it puts lines of width. See the W? Cross intersect lines, online centers on sequence, say the same pattern in the communications of convergence system of balance. Sets communication system, all through tractions, all through directions, all through settings. that communicates to the system alters that position to its bat. There's a bat. Okay? So what I'm doing is I'm putting everything all together in positions how you get into your angles and flux lines and pixelation graph lines and line condition, lacing line course, centers of calculation setting. So you keep yourself in straight lines of communications when you're traveling, guys. Okay, so you are the line signal that's traveling like this. You are the line signal that's traveling like this. You are the line signal that's traveling like this. You are the line signal that's traveling like this. Understand? That's all this is, nothing else. And its convergence system, how the connection setting to the brain convergence system has an 8-track provision. One signal, one ground, one surface, one traction. So we're going to A line centers, A equals lines of 0, 1. E equals lines of B, B over lines over 2, and center lines of travel. But position of direction has to come redirect back in setting. Everything has to go back in setting because what you're doing is you're adding dimensional layers of speed and acceleration setting of your panels in solid matter. And everything works in the line screen adaptations of travels that puts you in graph communication lines at set position, this operation. And understanding that through flux puts every location system all through calculation setting. Okay? So it's important you understand what you're doing and you're setting up dimensional layers of scales of communication. Different layers, because you're putting your particle acceleration setting positions of balance now. All right, so it's important you get in positions now because you have extended TV receptors. I have 144. Okay, so we stay within the line, right? Stay within the line, stay within the line. Okay, so every time the line's traveling, you're traveling. You're traveling. Your fingers are channel operation screens. They're basically, they change the station. Every time you put your finger anywhere else, every time you touch your finger on the table, you're changing the station, you're changing the echo, you're changing the screens, you're changing the flux, you're changing the angles, you're changing all lines of flux capacitor all through time. Every single time you touch things or hear things or feel things, everything that you're in positions of, you have to constantly be in self-line communications of balance in that directions. That puts position locations of balance. This is off balance. So if you're off balance, ego comes in flux and set lines of travel and direction. Now the ego comes in position, sucks you in through evac. So that's how fast the ego comes in. Now in the structure of the division line condition setting pulls you back in frequencies. So you have a triangulation here, signal lines of grounds, 3 central systems. Now it gets more complicated when you do something like that because you're changing the 45 angle. Percentage of our lines, 100% line screen, adaptation lines and settings. We're going to go through 95 line scale, process lines in sequence over lines, degrees over Fahrenheit, process lines into 48,000 lines degrees north, and set lines of south into set coordinates of the screen. So, you know, it's really interesting how you go through coordinates and triangulation line conditions of flux locations in delta heading just do a triangulation. And then you, in that position, you create the box screen around it. And that position of 4 centers of flights in direct location. You have to set up a graph. So every time you set up in a graph, you're traveling through it. And when you're traveling through it, you're traveling through line signals and putting everything all together into communications. Platforms over volume, volume over mass, velocity, and acceleration. That communicates to its ground centers, lines of set position, its operation, position lines of travel. Sets calculation ground centers, the earth line rotation system, line condition lines of travel. Process lines, all through the eye line centers, inside rotation, inside the eye calculation. It's inside the eye, happening all at once. So if we get a true understanding how to keep the balance in our signature line centers and rotations to our voicing pattern, because it's 3 body formation lines of voice lines, the process our indication setting, how we use that through light metaphors that gets in communication. So you understand a box brain. So every time you put a line signal, you're traveling through it. And what you do through indication changes everything, the modification of your mind imagination system. But every time you're creating thoughts, you're positioning your settings, you put in the E vector in locations to a vacuum that sucks you in attraction. Right? So the box has no other choice to go back in time. So you cut off all the tethers, you process outside lines of percentage, put your 100% line communication setting to travel, take out the 45 angle, process lines of position 90% line communications and setting of night, 10% lines of dark. operates line sequence, ground signature lines at grounds, highline position all levels, logging into space, this is general AI. Sets communication link, logging in, directing ground, sends lines of sequence, Alpha Bravo. Okay? So we're just reaching higher levels of set lines of communications, but you have to stay within the line. Okay? Even in winter lacing lines of communications are black and white. Black over lines over lights, lights over lines. You got a D factors over L, line conditions, all lines of question, process lines of E. So you guys get a better understanding of how to work with this E-line screens or anything through Flux, knowing exactly how to use point graph screens and indication system all through each line. Now, it's a net line course centers to its network that's set position to its umbrella that sets course centers that communication settings conversion system all through triangulation and calculation lines to its setting. Its umbrella. There's the umbrella. That's that communication. Sets coordinates of the I-line division of face recognition. Okay? Setting travels, indirect lines of link, and process communication. In that position to inside travel communication. And again, remember, everything is processed inside the I-line in that position. Doesn't matter how you see it in all formation settings, but it's all happening inside you. Set calculation. Okay? So the more you get out of line conditions of your bandwidth, everything starts to rotate in set position, higher lines of sequence. Process lines of indication lines, solar screens, directing ground lines, of where you are, your bandwidth, you modify your system, you align your travels, your direct line communication sending, all through convergence system, all through solar generation lines, communication sending, part of acceleration of space and time. Sets positions, and again, on sequence inside the eye. Okay, very powerful stuff, guys. All right, so it's important you understand how to align your signatures and grounds lines and settings into holographic grids that process your highways, 3 highways in travel. Okay, so you start off in AB. Now AB overlines a C, C overlines a D, D overlines a F. Now you can do whatever you want in the mind, but you have to constantly keep yourself out of sync, out of sight, out of sound, out of measure, out of scale, of balance. So it puts the line position location of graph lines. Process lines and the set lines at alpha, set lines of delta over cross down screen, and that line's screen locations. Indicates over lines of R over sequence, setting lines of 14 over scale. I'm constantly changing the alphabetical system and line signals because we're constantly in a continuous force that we modify our set lines of our Earth and rotation system into eye coordination settings that puts in our position locations of measure and scale that process our systems in the now line connection. And everything happens inside the I-line screen, adaptations of flux. Process of indication this way, process lines are that way in travel. Okay? So the more you come into the more lines of the mind, the more you come into the I-line spectacles. And it puts in position location how we use light signal lines at grounds, graphing screens. So set position over here, set position here, 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 and set travel. Set position over 2 tractions, 3 scales, 4 centers of measure, 5 lines, 1 signal line to grounds. Sets calculation setting. There's your pyramid in set position. All right. So the more you get in your imagination, the more it's easier to divide your setting, location, systems, and scale. Process indication over lines. Process in that line centers in rotations to graph. Setting graph screen line communication your walls that lines at signal location setting and scale. Sets ground centers lines of sequence over line set rotations in travel communications in all directions. Okay, set lines of set lines. Sets communication setting and position location your system all through projection. Inside rotations, look what you created on your simulation game. You process your platforms in direction. Okay, you set I sequence of platforms in online centers and rotation surface and travel. Now you can do it on different angles in that line communication setting, but each line has to be line signal. Graph calculation screen locations, graph line, send line communications. One is different from the other, but they all work together inside travel and simulation graphs and communication. Inside positions, all different angles and travel calculations. Okay? So as long as you understand how to put lines together, okay, so it's kind of like if I'm going to draw a circle, okay, I'm going to draw a circle Okay, that's a bit offline, but see the inside line, that doesn't work, so I got to do it again. Right, so you got to understand how to stay within the straight line of communications and settings. Well, that's pretty good. But see, there's a split, so you got to do it again. So the more you identify your system, the more you don't change your operation of your channels, of stations. That's right, guys, your fingers are stations that change channels. Again, see, look at that, see, emotion, right? So I'm just showing you. So it's about understanding how to keep the hind centers in location system and spectacles and start standing location system and staying in positions. Okay, so that's good, right? So once you get in that position, you set up your graphs, 3 centers, and set lines of truth and false narrative. That indicates settings. So all you're doing is connecting lines. Okay, that's all you're doing in set positions. So every time you're drawing a line, you're actually traveling through it. You're traveling through the past, present, future. So when you get into the past and you get into the present and you get into the future, you've already gone through pi. Set position here, past, present, and future, you've already gone through pi. Set positions of past, present, and future, you've already gone through pi. Okay, past, present, future, you've already gone through pi. See how that all works in clocking? So you can see it on all different schematics lines of setting and schematics over screen location setting and travel. But then you have to understand your intersections when it comes to calculations. So, it's just true to understand how to travel through it, guys. Okay, all through pi. So that generates the highways, that operates the signals, puts you in positions of balance, knowing exactly how to go through triangulation, how to draw it out. But see, there's a problem here because there's an open space. So it won't travel until you connect it. Now it can travel. Even though you look at that bend, see there's a bend there. You got to get specific, right? You got to fix that because if you don't, it overrides the signals and offlines your settings and location setting that marks the system off the travel. Calculate and modify and travel communication setting, right? So the ego comes in, takes positions, takes over triangulation lines of flux and travel communication. Sets off tones on centers, liking its setting with its void in set position. Okay? So it's very important you understand how to draw within a line, how to draw a straight line. A straight line is basically understand yourself, you're into the interconception set locations into your settings, and know exactly how you draw. So every time you're drawing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Count it out, right? So you're going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Right? So you can change the voice pattern. So I process lines of position of a 0, process lines of 1, process lines of 2, process lines of 4. Set position of all lines of 3, set lines of 2, set lines of 1, 0, 0, 0, and set travel. And that's your voicing pattern and location. Okay? All through a box frame and set position and calculations. All through I-line sequence and set calculation setting. All right? And it all starts with the center operation of you, right? And set communications. That's what's going on inside your I-line setting locations. So it's important to send lacing lines, communication interference, hydraulic lines, lacing communication, electrical line communication setting, and positional levels that put you in position location system off the calculation. Okay? Always to see what's going on with inside the I-line. Puts everything all together. Because that's how we go through the modifications to the I-line centers and how to go through the pi. So what you're creating is a lotus into a flower that recognizes your systems into a tree of life. So let's get in position of this setting. That's process of 1, right? Okay. Let's get in position of this. This is process of 2, right? Let's get in positions of this. That's process of 3, right? Let's get in positions of this. That's process of 4, right? Let's get into position of this. That's process of 5, right? So it's trying to find its balance with its I itself, all through flux. Now, once it understands its balance position, it comes in and open lines of sequence to position. Then it works with the inside lines, and then outside its system in Fibonacci, it rotates its cycles, location setting, and travel, and set position. Okay. Once it gets in a connection system, it has center lines of settings into 4 box frames, and that tractions. Then it comes in that position to its Merkaba tesseract and a tetrahedron to the I course that puts position lines of balance. Then it position lines of centers, and the more you get into observation, the more your eye gets bigger into its setting on travel communications, right? So it's just basic line signals when you go to longitude, latitude as you go through a graph. So this is your longitude, latitude. Okay, that's the bandwidth you have. You can't go any further. Okay, that is you right now. Okay, it's empty space, empty space, empty space, and empty space. All right, everything is empty space. Okay, empty space. So this is outclocking of empty space. Okay. Now, what you work with inside your system, okay, is your panels. Okay, is your panels in set position. Now, once you understand that, you understand your equilibrium and set location of your separation of your void. That process, your inside lines, crosses inside rotation of your time centers in line screen adaptation. That process the inside rotations into your Fibonacci. So you know exactly if you're going up or if you're going down in set position with its operation. Now, once you come in that position line high centers, you go back into the center because you're back at 0, right? 0 is back in the center of the eye, guys. It's not left or right. You always go back to the center, which is you, right? You're always back in position of observations of you. This is the observation of you, always you, back to you. So all you're doing is you're mind switching your imagination. It's this process of how you see the equilibrium of balance into your mind imagination system, okay? So it's about understanding what happens. Your body is always there in the center, which is the presence of everything of the now that processes every location setting, how it indicates the system all through travel, indirect lines of link, all through pi, that processes your system, how you see yourself in that position, all levels of now, that gets in communication, everything happening all at once in that position location to a system, all through calculations. Very powerful stuff, right? So you never leave the center, but you always go back to the center, which is direct and redirect. So every time you go back to the center, you're at a different frequency and you're expanding your systems in the I-line setting, the Fibonacci set position of square root. That processes your indication system all through set position to its eye itself. That's right, guys, just the eye itself. That volumes itself of it is where it is in its bandwidth through pi. Okay, in travel. Okay? So you're in the center operation lines. Anything outside sequence at a box frame, 4 box frame, okay, is the void. Okay, let's bring it in close so you can understand what the void is. Void is outside the box, not inside. Inside is used as a truth narrative. Now the pi generation lines is the outside travel. Very complicated stuff in travel communications and direction. Now, what you have to stand in that position to understand the void itself is truly understand how to motivate it in position locations is not to bring it in. Because if you bring it in, it brings it online centers and line sequence location of the system, all right? So your body's magnetic charge, and it knows exactly what's going on in provision. So in that line communications, as soon as you get offline centers, let's say you get in a box frame. You sit in the box frame, right? But then you are in the center, right? So if you change your imagination, your eye switches settings of travel. Now you're outside. Okay, so that's you. Okay, so all that void from 4 centers to set position takes you over in track locations. Okay, and it sucks you in. It sucks you in, see? And that's what you don't want. It sucks you in a box frame in triangulation. So it's really interesting too, because you start to understand the platforms of what you're doing in the grounds that implicates the system of what you do, and you're enabled in position that you bettered your system in implications that put you in positions how to balance these things out as you go through the void. So you can't avoid the void because the void is the yang to your yin, but you never leave the center of operation. Okay, but it's all happening inside the positions. Okay, which is actually amazing stuff. All right, so when you have a direct line center, so you can go out the lines of E factors over screen, 3 centers of travel, 3 line communications of webbing. Creating the webbing inside lines. There you go. Now you got positions of the void itself of balance. In that position, now you're creating a webbing system inside the eye. Okay, so once you're in that position locations, you work with the Fibonacci inside again. The process is the frequencies that change the time scale, that change the course centers of time, position, and measure. Sets position lines, the calculation screen locations. Now you got a Skynet grid, inside line communication, and directions, and all settings, all through calculation. Okay, very powerful stuff. Okay, this is happening inside your eye. At all different angles and travel. Look at this. This is wild. Okay, so, and you go inside, actual inside itself. Okay, and you go inside the setting. There's the wires, there's the indication, there's your Skynet. Okay, Skynet within the system, and you are here just observing everything, right? That's you observing. You like it, you move on. If not, you move it, right? So the observer view is a full frame of you that stays in the center operation of you. It's the imagination that changes everything, of course, that changes everything of time, that changes everything to measured scale, that changes everything of webbing to its eye itself. So, you know how you go outside and your eyes are positions of small, and then you go inside, your eyes are big. Well, that's in and out at the same time. It's going so every time you're looking at something, that's what it's doing. It's trying to identify you in set position. Right? It's trying to come to you, right, through a webbing system. Okay? So it's pretty amazing stuff when you understand what's going on. Okay, so when we get into that setting, it's much easier to see that in design itself. Now, once you get in that set locations, you set up another graph. Every time you set up a graph, you're changing the graph of communications into your truth and your false narratives, all right? So every time you're drawing a line, remember, it's you drawing the line itself. That's you. Okay? You're drawing the lines of past, present, future every single time you're traveling. So I want to make that very well clear. You stay in your own lines of indication. So it's lacing line, the process your systems, all through settings in travel communications. Okay? These are divots, these are transitions of all communicating your cells. So each cell modifies 3 centers of travel, 3 centers of course, it's that position of balance. Indicates ground centers of flux and screen location setting and one-track communication. All right? Directing online sequence, patterns, lines, rotation lines, they work together in a formation system of balance and calculations. Screen adapters, process lines of indication and setting, all through calculation. Okay, they work together. And then you cross the angles, process lines, and they create the communication of its bedding system lines of travel. Process lines of indication over line centers in platform communication. There's the platform. Set travel 9 position locations and settings, indicates online centers and online sequence. There's another platform of communication. So as they work together, you work together with your systems. Now you can add equations in that position to its settings. Okay? But you're traveling through line signals, line centers of operation of platforms. And that settings of all indicates setting of past, present, and future in finger point line communication of digitalized calculations. Inside rotations and travel, point lines of graph, inside track communication. So there's your docking stations and rotation lines of pixelation graphs. Now within that center, in that communications, you have vessel communicators, which are the XE1000s waiting on standby. They're behind the screens and adaptations of a pixelation frame of your T receptors and travel. Sets and indication lines of grounds, high lines of sequence, and correlation lines in light figuration system of tone. Process indicates centers in screen location system and calculations. All right, so once again, the measure and scale is where you come in the traffic of the runways and its highways and set positions. You can add line signals of panels and process of indication. Right? Set lines of flux and process of indication lines and set travels, and 3 set traffic communications. But you have to send the grounds, the powers, and the atmospheres that you're setting up through your platforms in set position. Okay? Now, once you have that core centers, the XE1000s comes out of the equation, the pixelation lines over setting. They ground their systems and send lines of travel in both sides and set position to settings. The process indicates the sending calculations. Okay? Now, that indicates lines. You change the course lines of time and part acceleration lines of screen. Set operation lines of panel operation of clocking screen location setting in process line centers. They direct on all 4 panels and pixelation grounds. They dock in their system in 4 pyramids that you put your positions of north, west, south, and east. They travel in point lines graph. They have a high course centers of calculations screen lines They set up perimeters of parameters, line course centers of communication lines of time and scale. Sites communications setting all through operation surface and travel calculations. Very complicated stuff, set position. Okay? Next level for you guys to understand. All right? So what did they create? A figure 8 rotation and travel. Okay, that's what your TV receptor has to be in position of energetic flow, supercharging highway. Your body comes in conversion system all through now and rotational lines has a continuous force and go through line, position, location, measure, and scale. Okay, all through your body. All right. Now, once you get in that position, this recourse to system calculation setting to polarities. Directing ground centers as center operation lines of sequence, the patterns of rotation lines of flux over screen change the patterns of course and time, products of communication. Directing over lines, line course centers that puts all communication as a convergent system, all through product cell line connections in settings, in position location and system, all through calculation. Okay, very complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun in set position in its operation. Okay. All right. So I'm showing you in so many ways how everything processes inside the eye itself. What you do. Okay. And once you understand that, it comes out setting. Then you set the structure. So that's an eye-line setting in sequence. Let's start with that platform, right? Process lines of 3 centers and measure and scale. You're good to go, right? Set position of past, present, and future adaptations, right? So your past is already done, so you don't go through the present because that's in the center of you. That stays in the now. The present is the now of everything, the process system. You just go to the past to the future line direction. You don't need to go to the center because the center is of you in that position location of travel. That puts you in position. Your eye line centers where you are in longitude, latitude. Longitude and latitude. Okay? That process how you see yourself in set position. Okay? All through calculation, modification, grounds, in operation, line center location to observe yourself in 4 different directions, all in settings. 4, calculate, modify, ground centers, lines of sequence, the platforms, your set locations, and lines of travel. Directing ground centers, high lines of platforms over E, factors over C, platforms over D, over track course center, galaxy alignments, and set position lines of calculation. And all direct signals. So every time you change your eye, you're changing your eye of a spectrum and set lines of travel. All through calculations, all through modification. Okay, and it's all happening in the center of the eye. Okay? So there's an inner course and there's an outer course. Interception, outerception. Inner frame, outer frame. The eye itself is the inner frame. The outer frame is the space frame. All through the eye. So it's getting to get more complicated as we go higher in the mind, guys, of the eye line itself. You just have to go on your longitude and latitudes and stay in position of observation setting because you work with everything inside its set location of activity. Okay, and the center course that never changes the frame. That's set positions. So you take yourself out, but you can't take yourself of who you are already. Existing in the center eye of everything. Okay, you're just changing your mind. That changes the spectrum of space and time through your image. And when you change your images, it's amazing what you can do in position lines of travel. Okay, so there's a lot to figure out here, right? It's a lot of connection setting that puts you in positions. How to see your formulation setting is understanding how to see the energetic graphs, set lines of 3 centers of scale, right? So 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 7, 7, 8, 9, right? So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 5 over 6, position of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So you have to understand how to balance this out. And the way to balance this out is truly understand is just to observe everything that you already know. So you want to be a walking path as a continuous force of what it's doing as it's going through system, that it isn't through traction. And the more it understands itself, everything, a rain graph, comes out of position. Okay, and you see everything happen all at once. So now you're looking up all this. And you just constantly keep going forward in set position because you're just observing everything in settings. Okay? And if you don't, in that position, all this is settings attached to the back of your system. and sent lines of travel. Comes into the void in lines of Quebec interference of Quebec of quantum entanglement of your system, and brings you back into its portal of its void itself in part acceleration of space and time in set position. So it's very important you understand that now, what's going on. So if you feel an energetic pull, right, there's a reason for that. Your body is reacting to that. It has to react and respond. If it's not responding, it's just reacting. If it's reacting, it doesn't understand what's going on with the system. You change the story, you change the alterations, you change your costumes. So you have to identify what's going on inside your positions and settings all through your eyes. Okay? But you're always in the center, which is the observer of you, looking out, looking everywhere all at once. All right? So you have an inner set lines and you have outer realm. Inner realm, outer realm. Okay? You're the inner realm, which is the truth. The outer realm, okay, is the void. That's the eye itself. It's that position. But this is the bandwidth of your streaming of your eye. Okay? So it's very powerful how you come into that settings. I showed you so many ways to see yourself, the webbing system that you create through the eye. Absolutely incredible. Absolutely amazing. Let's look at on a position location of systems off the settings through profile. Set positions here. Okay. Set position here, here. There's a window. Pretty basic, right? How you look through that and set positions. How you understand that in set position. All right. There it is in traction. Okay. That's what you brought in. Platforms over E, calculations of box frames and direct lines of grounds. Online sequence, online platforms over lines of flux. Inside rotations and structure divisions and rotation lines of ground calculations. All through triangulation, all through travel communication. So it's important you understand what you're doing from inside position first. How you're structuring the platforms, creating the platforms, guys, right? Create the platform, you're embedding your platform set position inside. All right, and when you create that, then you create the position of its power. Okay, and when you create that, then you position your systems. Now you can do anything in travel. There's your computer. So the computer comes out on this angle because you're created from the other angle. All right, so that process system has settings. It operates a system. There's a computer outside position. So it's an inner force to an outer force, the truth and understand the false narratives. Process lines and line signals, process your system locations, how to use that all through flux. All right, so let's get position line, high position location of truth. Okay, that process here, here, and here equals here and here. Let's process that, it's truth, right? And then we have our false. Okay, so false is this. That's false. So what we have to truly stand is light, shades, and shadows. Now once we understand the direction system, this is false. Okay, so everything that's a line signal crossing over line conditions is light, shades, and shadows is connected to the void. Everything that's open panel is open through you, through zeros and ones. So as we come in that positions, how you see the light interactions, it's all through false. It's pretty simple when you do in the other directions. Same with yin and yang. Okay, but yin and yang of false is the yin and yang itself. So it's very powerful how you come into the truth and the false of light, shades, and shadows. Lights, shades, and shadows. Okay? Lights, shades, and shadows all at once. Lights, shades, and shadows all at once. Lights, shades, and shadows all at once. There's the platform. All right, and there's your pyramid. So in that position, you have one direction. Okay, that's location 1/3 setting, one graph, one set lines of travel. Have a direct line link. So this is in position of coloring it in. Now it gets really interesting when you go in that position of truth and false narratives, how you use that through observations. You're coloring in that positions, right? There's the void. Okay, that indicates this in here, it's setting, see? That's indications of balance of yin and yang through truth and false. Okay, so it's the same angle, right? Same with the set position lines into high travel endpoint lines of graph, one set lines of calculations of green locations into one plane. Directing ground centers, high lines of sequence, process indicates the setting of calculate and modify. Directing ground centers, online sequence, online panel. There it is in set position of balance in travel communications. Okay, so that's false. That's false of balance. So I'm trying to get you guys to understand how to set position, location, directions. Online sequence here. And there's the light, shades, and shadows of balance. And we do the other side, which is here. Okay, so you're coordinating lines and settings all through track communications, right? And we have direct line centers and rotations and triangulations down across over here. Now we have to add that in. That processes angles because we're adding frame lines and direct lines of light, shades, and subs and travel. Okay? So I'm just showing you how that comes into false light, shades, and shadows, how it formulates the system of the void itself that you come to configure setting and balance. Truth is easy because it's just implementation lines of enabled, embedded, and screen adaptations of flux. Process line equal lines, equal here, and you can outside your set location signal. Process indication lines of 2 over attractions and direct lines of 0, 0, and processing. Process lines embedded, process lines of platforms over E factors over screen adaptations of travel and calculation. Okay? So that's the truth. That's the false. Okay? But how they work together is how they come in position now. As they come into position, they erase their lines and travels. Let's get the direct lines of settings of flux over screen location as setting. So we're going to process the triangulation over here and direct lines of grounds inside travel, outside line position and travel. Set lines, of course, centers of triangulation lines of travel. So as communicates inside, outside lines of travel and directions of light and dark. And set position, which is black and white. Okay? So that's when I'm indicating set position lines of calculation setting and ground lines of balance of truth and false narrative of space and time. So it's very powerful stuff, how you come into that position of a structure and set calculations. Okay? Very powerful stuff, guys. And set travel. Okay? That's the balance of yin and yang. Through the truth and through the void. So you work together in modification, in space modulation setting. Okay? And again, you're all doing it from where? Where's it coming from? All in that position of the eye. Okay? But you're always in the center. The center of you doesn't exist, but it's there when needed. But it's always there. So you always have the set position here, you got the set position here. All right, so you got the inner cycle and you have the outer cycle. The inner cycle is you, outer cycle is you. So the inner cycle is the outer cycle. And then you expand, right? The longitude, latitudes, and set position. But that's what you're always working with inside the eye position. A lot of activity going in that position location, trying to stand through light and dark, guys. Very powerful stuff through platforms. How to formulate your set location, how to communicate your configurations of your shadows, how to balance that out in online communication setting, position of light and dark, all through traction, all through locations. Booyah. Now once you send the center up, Fibonacci setting to travel, directing ground centers, online sequence of now, rotation system existing all once, and everything happening all at once in that position on the square root. Now everything's all coming together. As it's coming together in that position locations, in that position lines of settings, you're processing everything in that position of just waking up to yourself. All through setting, all through center, all through operation, seat lines and calculations, current lines are 4 screen locations of face recognition. There's your face, right? There's your face. Okay? You're always in the face of everything of center. All right? And then basically you can bring yourself an observation. Seeing what you like. Seeing what you did. You like what you did? If not, move it. Move it to another location. It's right there, observing everything inside the eye itself. So you are the observer, but you're also the center observer of the observation system. That puts you in the process how to see everything of the now. And the now is everything when we put ourselves into direct and redirect and set position location settings, all through tractions, into a webbing system and set calculations. Okay? Done by equation. All right, see you in 5.